So just to follow up on some of the topics that Bill was referring to. So many of you either may be on Social Security or maybe know someone who is going to be on Social Security. Does anybody know what the COLA increase is for next year? For 2020? It's 1.6%. 1.6%. That's the cost of living. Now, does everybody know how Medicare works with Social Security? Right? So Medicare premiums for Part B are paid out of your Social Security, correct? Right? So, does anybody have any idea of what the cost increase is going to be to your Medicare or someone's Medicare Part B premium is going to be, roughly? It's roughly going to be, the projections I had was roughly about $4.50 a month. So you're looking at going from roughly, it's going from roughly to roughly $143 a month, so it's roughly about $8 a month increase in your Medicare Part B premiums, right? So you're going to go from roughly $135.50 today to roughly $143 next year in 2020. All right. Now, if you take your 1.6% increase in Social Security, do you think that you're going to have significantly more money to spend in 2020 than what you had in 2019? Most likely not, right? I mean, most likely you're not going to see that number be significantly different, right? Yes.
Get that money that you get for Social Security, transfer the whole amount to Medicare?
So the question is, can they take the total amount that you get from Social Security and basically just divert that over to Medicare? The answer is yes, right? So basically, they could. So the rule for Medicare premium increases is there's what's called a hold harmless provision inside Medicare that says that they cannot raise Medicare premiums more than what you would receive an increase in your Social Security benefit. So if you only get a $5 increase in Social Security, they can't take your Medicare up by 10, right? They could take it up by 5, right? But they can't take it up by 10, even though maybe it should go up by 10, right? Because there's a cap on it. So you're getting roughly a 1.6% increase in your Social Security income, right? But remember, it's not what you make, it's what you keep, right? So if your Social Security goes up by 1.6%, which on $1,000 would be $1.60. I mean, not a big amount, right? Your most likely your Medicare premiums can't go up by more than $1.60 at that point, right? Because they could take the whole amount for it. They can. They have in the past. There have been instances in the past where they have. Am I telling you they're going to take all of it this time? I don't know until they actually come up with the final figure. Right. So, but the answer is, could they? The answer is yes, they could. All right. Now, if that doesn't give you a little some trepidation, the one thing to also consider about Medicare is that Medicare is income dependent. Right. So what that means, you say, okay, what's income dependent, right? Well, in Medicare, if you happen to make more than $85,000 a year as a single filer, you've made too much money, and now you're going to pay roughly another $800 a year in they didn't increase your Medicare premiums, you just made too much money, right? And there's roughly about another $900 cost. That would be, they will take it out of your Social Security to your Medicare premium then. So, as an example, my brother retired this year. I told better for him to make $84,000 than to make $86,000. And you said, why? I can make more money. I said, well, two problems. The first is you'll pay tax on the additional $2,000, right? Federal and potential state taxes on it, right? So you're not getting the full $2,000 at that point. Then you also are going to increase your Medicare premium by roughly another $900 for the year, right? So if after I pay the tax and after I collect the $900 for the Medicare surcharge, again, they did not raise my Medicare premium, right? They surcharge, I made too much money at that point. Now, all of a sudden, your $2,000 extra that you made, maybe it's $300, right? So it's not going to significantly change anybody's lifestyle, right? Maybe $300 is probably not going to have a significant impact on how somebody lives. But all of a sudden, the other problem with that becomes is that surcharge is going to be there for at least 2 tax years. Because the way that the IRS and Social Security know how much money you made is when you file your taxes. And they don't keep check on you every week, right? How much did you make this week? What did you make this? They don't know until you fill out your 1040 and you send them your 1040 in that for, right? So think of it in these terms. If you're on it for 1 year, when do you file your taxes? At the end of the next year. Well, it's not till March or April of the following year, right? Well, they're not going to immediately make that change. It goes because they've already started collecting the money and that for, right? So they hold it through. Let's say you went down below. They'll hold it through until the January 1st of the following year, and then potentially lower you at that point in time, right? So when Bill was referring to having to understand what you have and where the dollars are, this is a hidden tax that they don't call it a tax. They call it a surcharge. Call it whatever you want. If I don't have it in my pocket, it's a tax, right? So it's hidden. You don't hear many people talking about it. My fear, and this is a true fear that I have on it, is they're going to lower those numbers. So they're going to keep the 85,000 where it's at, but I think they're going to have a lower number. Does anybody know when Medicare is out of money? When it totally shuts down, there's no money in it? 2026, right? So 2026, it's out of money. So Medicare for everybody is great. It's out of money in 2023, right? So 2026, it's done. So how do you keep something potentially solvent? If you're capped on how much you can raise premium for people who are already in the system, where can you potentially get more money? You bring more people into the system by changing the numbers, all right? So they could potentially, I'm not saying they're going to do this, but I'm from Illinois and call me skeptical, right? Because they like taxes in Illinois, that they could potentially have a lower number, call it 65,000, right? What's the senior freeze this year? 65,000, right? So could they institute a 65,000 level to 85,000? They could, right? And maybe it's not $800 a year, maybe it's, I'll pick a number, $300 a year, right? Could they do that? Well, guess what? They just collected $300 or more, right? On, I don't know how many people are in that bracket, right? That potentially gets them more money. Can they increase the surcharges? They certainly can, right? At your higher income levels, it's significantly more. And what I mean by significant, it could be as much if someone would be fortunate enough to have saved enough money, sold a business and therefore make, let's say, $300,000 in retirement and therefore, they could be paying up to almost 10% of their income in Medicare, Medicare surcharges, Part D, and then their supplements. And this is a tax. It's not called a tax. Remember, it's a surcharge. And remember, it's just because you made too much money, right? So when you start looking at some of these behind the scenes here, these are the reasons why trying to understand and having income potentially available and different income types available can make a lot of sense. Because you get into something where all of a sudden, do you hear this on the news? No, you never hear anything about this on the news, right? You never hear about the potential tax area for it, right? I've had clients that came to me and said, wait a second, my Medicare went up like dramatically this year. Why? I said, well, what was your income for last year? It is what it is, right? So, and for example, everybody knows, like, some people like municipal bonds, right? Why do people like municipal bonds? No taxes at the federal level, right? But guess what they do for Medicare? They pull all those numbers back in. So let's say, for example, you're fortunate enough to have $10,000 worth of income coming in from municipal bonds, right? Guess what they do? And let's say you say my income was let's say my income was $90,000. Let's say I was able to be fortunate, I made $90,000. You say, oh, I got $10,000. Only made $80,000, right? Oh, you got to pay tax on $80,000. That's great for it. What do they do for Medicare? They say, no. Guess what you made? You made $90,000. You made too much money. So guess what? Now your Medicare is going to go up, right? So not all income is the same. All right. So yes.
You said 85,000 is for single file. What about married?
Married couples filing joint is 170 at the first level. Okay. But you also have to think of this in terms of, if God forbid one spouse passes, if you're married, one spouse passes, two things are going to happen. Well, several things could happen, obviously. First could be you could have less income, right? Because you're losing the spouse's income as part of it, right? What potentially happened to your income tax bracket, though? It may have gone up. Because before you had two people which were filing joint, getting all the deductions, right, for joint individuals. Now you only have one. So instead of getting, if you just take the standard deduction today, which is $24,000, right? If you only have one person taking that deduction, you only have 12, right? So now the potential amount of money available for taxes potentially could go up. Right. So, yes?
So what's the vehicle that we can use, or the tool that he was referring to I have a 403B?
So there's also, the question was what type of tools are available. There's a number of different tools available for it, right? Life insurance happens to be a potential tool that can be used, which can provide potential income streams and therefore on a tax advantage basis for it. You could use potentially real estate investments, because typically on real estate investments, a lot of times, only half of the interest you receive, typically, is considered a return of principal. The other is considered taxable income, right? So if you get $5,000, you're only paying tax on roughly $2,500 at that point in time, right? So it's a matter of looking at your particular situation and understanding how we can potentially take a look at it and maybe reposition assets. For example, again, like annuities. Annuities have what they call exclusion ratios, which means a portion of it is considered principal, a portion is considered income, right? So again, in my example, if you've got $5,000 worth of income, but only $2,500 of it is showing as taxable, and the other $2,500 is considered a return of principal, well, guess what? You've got $5,000 which you're only paying tax on, $2,500. Right? So it depends on the situation. That's where doing the planning and trying to understand what we have can make a lot of sense, and try and make sure we've got assets in the right place to do the right thing. All right? So if that doesn't concern you, it should, because it affects everyone, whether you're in retirement or not, because it could potentially mean that taxes are going to go higher, right? So the COLA adjustment, again, 1.6%. Payable to more than 63 million Social Security benefits, right? And then they will also increase if the year you turn 66. So you know someone that's turning 66, the year you turn 66, up until your birthday, you can earn up to next year up to $48,000 and not have losing basically $2 for every one over it. All right. So there are some different rules with regards to that for it. All right. If anybody knows someone who is a state employee who has either SERS, TRS, or not IMRF, one other one. The state has started to implement the buyout program for it, right? And so if you're not familiar with the buyout program, for those employees, my wife happening to be one of them, is that what they will do is they will calculate what your pension is going to be. So let's say someone's going to get, pick a number, $30,000 in that for it. And what they will do is they will give you the lump sum difference between the $30,000 and that cost of living raise for basically 10 years at that point in time for it. So you don't pay the raise, they give that to you in a lump sum up front, and then your 3% COLA starts to kick in 10 years down the road. While it can be a good option for somebody to take, the longer term concern should be for taxpayers, all right? Because I looked at it, I'm like, okay, I get it that they're trying not to have to pay the COLA increases, right? But where is the money coming from to pay this lump sum? Does anybody know?
Taxpayers.
Well, they issue bonds, so taxpayers, right? So the thought is that the cost of the interest in that on the bonds is going to be less than the cost of the COLA over the period. I'm not sure I trust Illinois' numbers with regard to it, right? And to what they say that the numbers are going to be for it. So if someone is in that program, my wife happens to be in the TRS program and that for it, it's a consideration to potentially take it. And my comment to her was, that may be the only money long-term that you get. Because if TRS is only funded at 40%, at some point in time, it's going to blow up. And when it does, by Supreme Court ruling, there is no requirement that those benefits have to be paid. So public pensions, so you understand, public pensions are considered benefits. Social Security is what? It's a benefit, right? You're paying the Social Security, it's a benefit. It's a social benefit. Social benefits can be changed, altered, or eliminated at any point in time. Now, don't go out and say, I told you Social Security is going to stop. That's not what I'm saying. Okay? That is not what I'm saying. But if they wanted to tomorrow, they could say, no more Social Security. I don't think that'll ever happen, but they could, right? So, if you remember back when, Social Security used to never be taxed, right? Now Social Security at certain income levels is taxed, right? Was that a change to Social Security? Well, sort of. You didn't change, I guess, Social Security per se, but you changed the rules around how much of it I get to keep, right? Yes?
How would you say Social Security is a benefit?
It is.
I'm paying it?
It's a benefit. It's considered a social benefit. That's why it's called social, right? Social Security, right? It's a social benefit, right? So, so if you do know someone that is in a state pension program, we'd be happy to talk with them about it, because there may be some, if they decide to at least have the conversation about the lump sum. The concern I have personally on the lump sum portion for it, now think about it, these are supposed to be dollars that you're supposed to basically set aside to be able to cover your cost of living increase that you're not receiving, so you have the money to spend in the future, right? So it's supposed to be an additional pension benefit, theoretically, right? My concern is that a lot of people will look at that and go, oh, I'm going to get a, pick a number, $50,000 check, right? And now they're going to spend it. Well, if they take the $50,000 as cash, all that $50,000 is taxable, right? So they don't get $50,000. They maybe get $35,000 after taxes and everything for it, right? And now guess what? They don't have. They don't have $50,000 that's going to grow to something to be able to provide more income for them in the future. Does anybody think we're going to need more or less income in the future? More. Right? So if you flatten out your pension number, right, and you don't have additional income in the future, and you've already spent the money for it, where does that money potentially come from? Right? So that's a concern that I have. Other people may not, but it is something that I do think that can be very pertinent out there. Again, the projection on it right now is roughly an $8.80 increase to the Medicare Part B, which would be roughly $144.30. So they have not published them as of yet. The figures for it, those will most likely come out here within the next 30 days, and then you'll be able to be in a situation where it's at for it. The other. So talking about does anybody in here pay property taxes? Does anybody rent and not own their home? Do you think you don't pay property taxes? They pay it in the rent, right? I mean, the landlord says, okay, my property taxes went up by whatever they went up, and guess what? That now get divided by the rent, right? So, if you are in Chicago, anybody in Chicago resident? Okay. You just had a strike that ended, right? And was there any wording on how they said they were going to pay for that?
They're coming after us again.
So you are aware, just so you're aware, the state of Illinois changed the law for Chicago, and for CPS, where CPS can arbitrarily come in and raise property taxes. They don't have to go through automatic approval. They don't have to say, they can just go in and automatically change what theirs is. So, I did a quick math on the numbers, right? So, the city estimated initially it was going to be roughly $2.4 billion more that the contract was going to cost. And literally, they were out for 14 days and they basically got everything they wanted. So, $2.4 billion. Do you know what that is on a per pupil basis? It's roughly about $6,000 more per pupil in Chicago. It's roughly, it's about, if you take 2.4 billion divided by, I think they said roughly 350,000 students, right? That's roughly $6,000 more per pupil.
I know I shouldn't have asked this question, but last year 55 schools were closed in Chicago, so these numbers are staggering. You're saying $6,000 per.
I'm just taking simple math.
Yeah,
Take $2.4 billion divided by 350,000 students. Gives you, I think it's like 58 something, so let's call it for round number, $6,000.
And then the police and fire contract comes up too. So.
Well, there's a difference between, we'll get to that in a second, but if you think of it in these terms, that's $6,000 on top of what they're already spending. Right? So if they're spending, I don't know, $12,000, they're now spending $18,000. Right? So the question becomes long term, where is that money going to come from? And at any point in time during the negotiations, did you hear any conversation about pensions?
No.
And the CPS pension is out of money roughly in 2034. Could be give or take, right? 2034, it's out of money. Why did not the union president say anything about pensions?
Because we're protected. We have a law.
You don't vote for them.
No.
As a retiree, you don't vote for the CTU. Do you?
No.
So why does he care about you? Right? He's focused on the, I don't know, how 25,000 other workers or whatever the number is. He cares about them. Why? Because he wants to get reelected to be your president, right? And keep his, whatever, $250,000 or whatever the job pays that for, right? So, there's, and the city is already, I had the number here for it, well, there's already an $800 million deficit for last year that they haven't paid, that they're behind, and the pension payment was, I think, $500 million of that, right?
The state's under too, isn't it?
I'm sorry?
The state of Illinois is under pensions too.
All the pensions are underwater, right? So Chicago as an entity is roughly about $50 billion behind to keep pensions solvent, and therefore, state of Illinois, depending on your actuarial numbers, anywhere between 130 and 200 billion behind. My wife, who's in TRS is $70 billion behind as far as what they're supposed to have in there to be able to make the pension and that solvent. Does anybody think that they're going to come up with this money for it? Okay.
How about offshore gambling? I'm being funny.
Well, there's a number of different issues with regard to that for it. So as part of the budget area for it, there were a couple of things for it. So where's it? So the Chicago budget, higher dining, rideshare costs, plus the state help on the casino, right? So the big deal everybody wanted to say about the casino revenue in the state of Illinois is down. Overall gambling revenue, taxes on gambling are up in the state, but casino revenue is down, right? When they do sports gambling and allow that to be on the app and everything else, most likely you're going to see casino gambling probably decline more. So they want to invest money into a declining business, which is showing less revenue being generated in that for it, right? Yes?
You mentioned that there's an $800 million deficit for the city.
That they haven't paid yet.
But my question is, whose administration...
doesn't matter. The bill's got to be paid.
No, my question is it Lightfoot or Robbie Manning that was in office?
Who's in charge now?
That's all.
It's their budget. You want the job, you get the budget.
But did she inherit that? Or
doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who inherited it. It doesn't matter what happened in the past. If you want the job and you take the job, you get the good and you get the bad. So it doesn't matter whose budget it is, the bill's got to be paid.
Well, I understand that part, but Robert Miller always bragged about he had a balanced budget.
Well, it doesn't matter. All I'm telling you right now is the numbers are behind. It doesn't matter whose budget could have been under daily. It doesn't matter. Could have been under first daily. Doesn't matter. All that matters now is there's a deficit that needs to be paid, and the funds aren't there to pay it, right? So part of what she's looking at, the proposed, if anybody use Uber or Lyft or anything like that? Okay, you have. They're going to have a congestion tax. I think this is kind of funny. I thought it was kind of funny. A new downtown zone charge that amounts to $1.75 per trip for single ride, 60 cents per share. But the hours of operation were from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. I'm like, okay. I thought congestion tax, I was thinking like 6 to 9 in the morning and 4 to 7 at night. No, 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. at night. Not 10 a.m., 10 p.m. I'm not quite sure why they just don't say all day. Maybe the people at 3. There's not a lot of people out at 3 o'clock. I don't know. I just found it kind of funny in that for it. The other part was anybody eat out in the city? Okay, all right. Just so you know, you better hold on because there's going to be another 0.25% tax on top of that. So if you don't think, yeah. Now restaurant and bar patrons in the city pay 0.25 on top of the other sales tax applied. That could become 0.5%. So patrons could pay in total. How much do you think in tax? 11.75% in downtown Chicago.
So what we need is a city income tax like New York, right? Basically, because all of these taxes are nickel and diming us to death.
Well, I mean, so the statement question was, do we need a city tax? Well, I can tell you this: if you impose a city tax, do you think people will stay or leave the city?
Well, they're leaving now anyway.
Well, they'll leave faster. Right? They're also talking, if you use a parking meter fees would rise about 50 cents an hour based on the CBS report, right? So those are two key. One last area, just to kind of, if you're talking about the pension side of it for it, pensions add some pressures on taxes, right? So in the heart of Illinois, the city of Peoria cut its workforce by almost 1/5 to pay annual obligations for police and fire pensions. In northern Illinois, Waukegan is selling bonds to keep the city operating. In the east, Danville closed one of its 4 fire stations for mounting pension bills. In state capital Springfield, for the first time, is pouring every dollar it collects in property taxes into its pensions. Okay? So, in the article, in some of them it's outstripped. Last year, every dollar of property tax collected in Springfield went into the pension fund. Next year, the bill will go up by another $1.4 million, the mayor said. Over 20 years cumulative, that would mean property tax collected by nearly $270 million. Okay? Do we have a pension problem? In Rockford, the city's cost to maintain the pension fund jumped 82% between 2012 and 2018. Firefighter payments doubled. In 2012, the city was spending $9.6 million on public pensions. In 2020, the budget amount is $20 million. And in 2025, it's projected to be $26 million. And by 2030, will consume all property tax.
Who will consume it?
The pension. So the pensions in Rockford, they're projecting that by 2030, every dollar that is collected in property taxes is going to go into pension. Okay? So, yes?
She has a question.
Let's see.
So,
that's where I need to move to, right?
there are a lot of people paying Social Security. First of all,
It's not nice here.
well, the people who work under the government, certain jobs, they don't even get all their Social Security. You only get like a third of the money that they actually took out. Okay, so the people who died, who would have gotten Social Security, well, all the rest of their, what's going on with, what happens with all that money that people are not getting? And there are also people who have paid into the pension funds, pass away, and they don't, that money goes somewhere because they don't have a spouse or something to get that money. That money goes back into the system. They never say nothing about all that money that goes back. They don't even.
The money never goes back.
Okay,
So the question was with with Social Security kind of specifically, if you pay into Social Security and if you have a municipal, county, or state employee and you have a pension from it, you don't get all of your Social Security money. So typically the number on the windfall it's a windfall elimination provision. For those of you old enough to remember, I call it the Dan Rostenkowski rule. Okay, because Rostenkowski at the time was in charge of House Ways and Means Committee and put that into effect. Okay, so this was 1983 when they redid Social Security Network. Okay, so what happens is, remember what is Social Security? What are the two words in it? Social Security, right? So, like any pension, if you have a pension and you're with, I'm going to use AT&T just as an example for it, right? And you're a single person in that for it, you can get a high payout or you can get a certain period. After a period of time, if you pass, that money just stays in the plan. It doesn't get paid, it goes in and basically gets used to pay other people. The same thing with Social Security, that money stays in the plan and basically gets used to pay other people for it, right? So if you want to think of a Ponzi scheme, okay? Most people won't like my analogy for it, but Social Security is Ponzi. I mean, if you think of what's a Ponzi scheme? A Ponzi scheme says you give me your money and I pay the person to it, right? And maybe it lasts long enough for me to get you, but if not, you might not get anything, right? Well, isn't that potentially what's happening with Social Security? Right? I mean, so I know no one's going to want to say it, right? But it's basically the people at the bottom, right, are paying into the people at the top, so to speak, to continue to get it. And I'm not trying to complain. You say you shouldn't have it, right? I'm just saying that's the way that basically that it works, right? And as so to speak, people fall off at the top, other people move up. But two things have happened within Social Security. When Social Security was enacted back in the 30s, do you remember does anybody know what the average life expectancy was back in early 40s? It was for men, it wasn't even 60, right? For women, it may have been a little bit more. So when they put 65 in as the first one, guess what wasn't happening? People weren't getting to 65, right? I mean, they were getting to 60 and they would happen. And then if you were fortunate enough to make it to 65, well, back then, statistically, it was maybe there were 3 or 4 years that a person was going to collect, and then they would stop collecting, right? Because they go bowling with the angels, right? So that money theoretically was going to last more. The idea of retirement at 65 was not that was a magical age. At the time, for Social Security, I forget the exact numbers, but it was like 10 to 1 the number of people working to pay into Social Security. The idea was to get people out of the workforce so that there would be jobs for younger people. That's what kind of initially what it was back then. It's totally changed today. Today, a lot of people think that that's their only source, and have projected that that's their only source of income in retirement, right? That I'll get Social Security. Well, great, but is Social Security going to be enough to cover everything, right? I mean, the maximum I think for this year is about $35,000. Well, $35,000 is a lot of money, don't get me wrong, but if it's income that you got to live on $35,000, and that's $35,000 net or gross? Gross. If you're on Medicare, you got to pay any Medicare premiums, right? So you got to pay Medicare premiums on that for it, right? Then you got to pay, if you own a home, you got to pay property taxes, right? So at the end of the day, $30,000, well, I'd like to have an extra 30 in my bank account, is not really a lot of money in that for, right? The point on the pension, if it's there, is that the pension dollars are unsustainable. Right? I mean, if every dollar Waukegan is taking in property taxes is going toward the pensions, and they're borrowing, taking bonds to basically pay their day-to-day expenses, where does the money come to pay the bond interest? And the bond's not for, right? So a colleague of mine teaches public finance. One of the things that he made me aware of is that in public and municipal bonds that are issued, there are covenants in there. One of the covenants in there, if a bondholder were to default, the person issued the bond were to default, if the bondholder has at that point in time the right to be able to come in and raise property taxes on all the people that bond is against immediately, to recover the money that they were told that they would receive, right? I mean, nobody wants to loan money to their brother-in-law, right? Because you never get it back, right? And that's kind of like the state of Illinois. Nobody wants to loan money to the state of Illinois because nobody ever knows if they're going to get it back, right? So borrowing costs in Illinois have continued to accelerate because we have to have we're bad drivers, right? So we have to pay higher rates, right? Bad drivers theoretically shouldn't pay as good a rate if somebody never gets in an accident, right? So state of Illinois, because they have to pay higher interest rates, means that more money has to go toward paying the bond interest, right? And less can be used for whatever else they want to steal money for, right? So the key on it here is starting to look at the pension portion here, and these are individual municipalities. So if you think it's not going to affect you because you're in Mokina or you're in Oak Lawn or you're in Matson, just because you're not in Chicago per se, right? You're under a false assumption, I think, right? So the key is starting to look at what type of income we have, where the income is coming from. If we have monies that aren't necessarily earning very much for it, how do we take those monies and potentially have those monies generate income or cash flow to be able to keep up with the expenses, right? Next year, property taxes are going to come out in February if you're in Cook County, right? Typically, they don't hit you get your first larger estimate in the spring, right? Or you may not see as big of a reduction then on the second estimate because they're going to need the dollars to pay, right? One of the other comments, or that they want to install, or they've talked about that the mayor's talked about in Chicago is an exit tax. You're talking about people leaving, right? Well, he wants to impose an exit tax, right? Oak Lawn already has one. Right, so Oak Lawn, if you decide to leave the village of Oak Lawn for it, and you sell your house, you're not going into an assisted living center, or you can't prove that you're going because of health issues or that going somewhere else, they have a tax free. I don't remember exactly what the tax is. If you are going to like an assisted living or something like that, you can potentially petition to get those funds back for it, but nobody really knows about it, so unless you really know to ask for it, you never get it. Right? There's discussion, she wants to do that for Chicago. The state's talked about it. There's so many people are leaving the state that they are talking about having more taxes. So just so you know, Illinois is number one. We are number one. You want to be number one in something, right? We are number one in, the highest tax state to live in. Right? And that includes not just state income taxes, but takes into account property taxes, sales taxes, all the other nickel and diming that happens for it, right? So as you start to look at things, it's a matter of how do we take these things, and again, all income is not the same income, right? So it's understanding what you have, how we can look at it, and potentially setting those dollars up to be able to say, how do we have more going forward, right? The big question, I think, is going to be in, I think it's 2021 or 2022, something like that. The Chicago Fireman Fund is out of money. All right. So the big question is like, what's going to happen? Sorry? The fire question, the Chicago Fireman's Pension Fund is out of money. The next couple of 2-3 years.
Okay. So do you think that's the reason with all this debt that the state is recording today? We're trying to file bankruptcy that they don't have.
So the question is, do they want to file bankruptcy? Well, bankruptcy is two things. First is, so public bankruptcy, if for the Chicago to be able to file bankruptcy for it, the state has to allow them to. All right? And if they were to do so for it, the bondholders, who I mentioned, if they're not going to get paid, they have the potential right to come in and raise property taxes immediately to recover their money. Right? It happened in Detroit. The only difference is nobody lives in Detroit, right? So trying to collect 100% of zero is still going to get me zero, right? So they had to acquiesce on that for it. Chicago's a completely different situation. If they were to file bankruptcy, depending on how they decide to choose the pensions, I don't know how they would do that for it. I mean, that's a whole potential issue. You mentioned about the police and fire for it. Difference between police and fire, they are considered essential personnel. Essential personnel cannot strike. All right. They cannot go on a picket line and potentially strike at that point, right? So the whole problem right now is there's no money to pay what they said they're going to pay for it, and then you've got other people that you lining up to get paid, but there's no money to pay them. So I don't know where the gravy train, so to speak, ends.
Because Ronner tried to.
I'm sorry.
Ronner tried to change the pension obligation through the state. And the Supreme Court said, no, you can't change the pension. Because essentially, I think if the state could bankrupt.
State can't go bankrupt. Well,
right, I know.
The state could. Right. Here's why I don't think the state ever would.
Okay.
All right, is what did we say earlier about municipal bond interest? It's not municipal bond interest is a federally tax exempt interest, right? You don't have to pay federal tax on it. That's why a lot of people like to buy municipal bond. If Illinois were to default and the federal government were to come in and bail Illinois, I'm not saying they would, but if they were, what do those bonds then become?
What was?
Federal bonds.
Oh, okay.
And interest on federal bonds is now taxable at the federal level. It's exempt from the state, but taxable at the federal level. So now, if Illinois wants to issue bonds to get a tax equivalent yield for it, if right now, let's say they can do 7%, let's say, because it's a non-taxable number that I don't have to pay at the Fed, all of a sudden now you're talking about 12, 13, 14% interest that you're going to have to pay, because on an after-tax number it's going to get down to, let's call it 8 to 9%. All right? So now the borrowing cost just exploded. Right? That's why, in my opinion, I don't think you'll ever see the state ever file bankruptcy, nor would the federal government ever come in and bail them out.
The news just sounds so glum. It sounds
well. The point is that people need to take action, and the problem is nobody wants to take any action for it. The easiest way to potentially solve some of the pension problem is to put it on the ballot. It's a state constitutional. Let it be state constitution to remove cost of living or not have pensions at all as far as the state goes, and let people do that. Right? Never going to happen. Why is it never going to happen? What do politicians get? Come on, pensions. And they get state, county, or municipal pension. That's why in Illinois, I don't think, personally, pensions will ever be taxed. Why? Politicians get pension. Are politicians going to write laws that they now have to pay taxes on? They could. They very well could. I'm not saying they could. Do I think in Illinois that that's a high probability of happening? No. Right? So the key to it becomes is that you need to put yourselves in position to be able to have income and cash flow to be able to be sufficient to be able to cover some of these additional costs. Because the end of the cliff, so to speak, is coming. I don't know when it's coming. I'm not saying it's here tomorrow or the next day for it. But unless something is done relatively soon, you've got to start to prepare for some of these additional costs that are going to be there. I mean, and the rate at which people are leaving Illinois is, phenomenal, right? So you keep leaving. So what are we going to do? We're going to raise taxes more, so more people leave, right? So anyway. And charge you for leaving, right? If they can find you, I guess, right? So only if you own property. I guess if you're a renter, you don't own property, you could leave and they wouldn't. I guess they on your state income tax. I guess they could find it. They'll find some way to get you. One good collection agency is the IRS. They do find a way to collect everything for us. So. Any other questions? So. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming. We'll look forward to seeing. Oh, I do have one last thing. Just one last thing on a personal note in there for it. Last month was the Chicago Marathon. My oldest daughter competed in the Chicago Marathon for us. She finished, she was the 7th woman overall, 3rd American, and she beat her best time by about 1.5 minutes. Thank you. I had a lot to do with it. I yelled at her the whole way. But it was she wasn't feeling well that day, but she still ran extremely well in that for her. So 2:28.08. So 8 seconds cost her $3,000 because there's a bonus pool for the Chicago Marathon. If you can do it under 2:27 or less, you get a bonus. So she was 2:28.08. Maybe you'll hard so I should have thrown some at her. Maybe she would have ran faster. So anyway, but so personal notes. We were very excited for her. She was really happy in that for it. It's preparing her well. She's going to run the Houston Half Marathon in January to prepare for the Olympic trials in February. So we'll keep our eyes on that.
What's your first name?
Lindsay.
Okay, I saw it listed they gave it every finisher.
Yes.
In the paper.
Yeah, she was top 7th woman come in, and the 3rd American overall for her. So that was really we were really excited for her because she worked hard for it. So, yes.
What do you think about this? Everything is going on. This is medicinal marijuana is a business. All these people, they actually, some of them, I talked to a friend yesterday, started off with some investments, and then they made $825,000 within this last 6 months. They had initial investments. A company bought them, so they made $825,000.
So the question was about medical marijuana or legalized marijuana, I guess, in Illinois for it. I will say this about it. So there's no coming back out of the rabbit hole. You've already gone down. I mean, I don't know why they don't tax everything at this point in time. They're taxing gambling, they're taxing drinking, they're now taxing drugs at that point. I think that the state has already increased the amount of money that they've budgeted for use in that for it from about $800,000 to about $6.8 million, right? So roughly $6 million increase, right, for it, which they don't have anyway for it. And what I think you're going to see, there was something on one of the news stations, gummies. I don't know much about it, but I guess you can get gummies that have marijuana and that in their court, right? So when they start getting into there, in about another year and a half, give it that, it's going to be deemed as the worst thing that ever happened because all the kids in school will now get the gummies. And so now you'll have problems with kids in school and they'll be blamed for it. They'll try raising more taxes on it. You're going to see more and more of it go underground. It's like there's an article that I had that was talking about it's titled a new black market is starting for Illinois. Because Illinois right now is talking about banning vaping, right? Okay. I don't do it. I don't know much about it now for it. But what's going to end up happening with it is that you're going to take the vaping, it's just all the new flavors or whatever go along with it, it's going to go underground. So any tax revenue you had for it is going to be gone. And so you're going to be in a worse position than what you were. The irony I find to it is that there's like 34 deaths, I think. That's what I think I had heard. And I don't know how many people vape. I have no idea for it, but there's a lot. It seems like every time I'm driving around, people are vaping that for it. So for 34 people, they want to change the entire area. If they did the analysis on the 34, it wasn't from I'll call it the legalized portion. It was from cartridges, because I guess you get blank cartridges. Yeah, I don't know anything about it, right? But the blank cartridges were filled with other toxic issues, and that was what the issue was. So it wasn't whatever name brand would be in vaping, I don't know. It wasn't those, it was the other ones. So now they're going to eliminate it. What it's going to do, it's going to cause black market for it, and so taxpayers won't benefit from it because of that. So anyway.
On the news on TV yesterday, the city of Chicago, they're doing licensing for the people to do medicinal marijuana. The people who are going to grow with these dispensaries, they got licenses. They're doing licenses.
I understand the licensing for it, but I think people that I know people who have gone to Colorado and Denver, and Denver's had legalized marijuana for a while. We were out visiting our daughters last year. Again, I have not smelled marijuana in a long period of time. I'm walking by a park.
Yeah.
Kids playing in the park. There's like a ravine down there. It smells like a skunk around here, And my kids started laughing at me. They're like, that's marijuana. I'm like, Okay, I mean, and then here it was, they were no more than 50 feet from a park. Now, it's not supposed to be out there to be able to do it, right? If it's so good and it's such a great thing for the city, I have a question. Why are they not having it allowed downtown to be sold? Why in the business district are they not letting it be sold? If this is supposedly a panacea and it's great and there's no problem with it and we should have it, then why are you limiting where it's being sold? So the problems are going to be much more than what's there for it, and I think in about a year and a half, you're going to have so many more problems than what they've anticipated for it that literally the juice isn't going to be worth the squeeze. My personal opinion. Anyway, so, well, thank you very much. You guys have a wonderful Thanksgiving.